The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Dedication to the magnificent Lorenzo de Piero de' Medici. Those who strive to obtain the good graces of a prince are accustomed to come before him with such things as they hold most precious, or in which they see him take most delight. Whence one often sees horses, arms, cloth of gold, precious stones, and similar ornaments presented to princes worthy of their greatness. Desiring, therefore, to present myself to your magnificence with some testimony of my devotion towards you, I have not found among my possessions anything which I hold more dear or value so much as the knowledge of the actions of great men, acquired by long experience in contemporary affairs and a continual study of antiquity, which, having reflected upon it with great and prolonged diligence, I now send, digested into a little volume, to your magnificence. And although I may consider this work unworthy of your countenance, nevertheless, I trust much to your benignity that it may be acceptable, seeing that it is not possible for me to make a better gift than to offer you the opportunity of understanding, in the shortest time, all that I have learned in so many years, and with so many troubles and dangers, which work I have not embellished with swelling or magnificent words, nor stuffed with rounded periods, nor with any extrinsic allurements or adornments whatever, with which so many are accustomed to embellish their works. For I have wished either that no honour should be given of it, or else that the truth of the matter and the weightiness of the theme shall make it acceptable. Nor do I hold with those who regard it as a presumption if a man of low and humble condition dare to discuss and settle the concerns of princes, because, just as those who draw landscapes place themselves below in the plain to contemplate the nature of the mountains and of lofty places, and in order to contemplate the plains, place themselves upon high mountains, even so to understand the nature of the people, it needs to be a prince, and to understand that of princes, it needs to be of the people. Take then your magnificence, this little gift in the spirit in which I send it, wherein, if it be diligently read and considered by you, you will learn my extreme desire that you should attain that greatness which fortune and your other attributes promise. And if your magnificence, from the summit of your greatness, will sometimes turn your eyes to these lower regions, you will see how unmeritedly I suffer a great and continued malignity of fortune. Chapter 1. How many kinds of principalities there are, and by what means they are acquired. All states, all powers, that have held and hold rule over men, have been and are either republics or principalities. Principalities are either hereditary, in which the family has been long established, or they are new. The new are either entirely new, as was Milan to Francesco Sforza, or they are, as it were, members annexed to the hereditary state of a prince who has acquired them,
day from above
as was
ground.
the kingdom of Naples to that of the King of Spain. Such dominions thus acquired,
yes, sir, a little Machiavelli for you this morning.
Under a prince, or to live in freedom, and they are acquired by either the arms of the prince himself,
a little bit
or of others,
black
tea, by fortune or by ability. Chapter 2. Concerning hereditary principalities. I will leave out all discussion on republics.
Oatmeal could use probably another 30 seconds in the microwave.
I will address myself only to principalities. In doing so, I will keep to the order indicated above, and discuss how such principalities are to be ruled and preserved. I say at once
that my internet went out right before the Rua fight, and that's some shit.
States, and those long
I was able to catch it because it wasn't that long, but
new ones. For it is sufficient only not to transgress the customs of his ancestors, and to deal prudently with circumstances as they arise, for a prince of average powers to maintain himself in his state, unless he be deprived of it by some extraordinary and excessive force, and if he should be so deprived of it, whenever anything sinister happens to the usurper, he will regain it. We have in Italy, for example, the Duke of Ferrara, who could not have withstood the attacks of the Venetians in 84, nor those of Pope Julius in 10, unless he had been long established in his dominions. For the hereditary prince has less cause and less necessity to offend, hence it happens that he will be more loved, and unless extraordinary vices cause him to be hated, it is reasonable to expect that his subjects will be naturally well disposed towards him, and in the antiquity and duration of his rule, the memories and motives that make for change are
for
lost.
As long as there was a royal
one
family
change always leaves the two thing
in
for
the
another.
serfdom Russia,
Chapter 3. Concerning
their
mixed
hopes for changing the country would never come
But
to
if the
fruition,
difficulties occur in a new
unless they,
principality,
of course,
and
remove
firstly,
them.
if it be not entirely new, but is, as it were,
Violent is
a
history.
member of a state which, taken
Mr. History of
collectively,
Violence.
may be called composite, the changes arise chiefly from an inherent difficulty which there is in all new principalities. For men change their rulers willingly, hoping to better themselves, and this hope induces them to take up arms against him who rules, wherein they are deceived, because they afterwards find by experience that they have gone from bad to worse. This follows also on another natural and common necessity, which always causes a new prince to burden those who have submitted to him with his soldiery, and with infinite other hardships which he must put upon his new acquisition. In this way you will have enemies in all those whom you have injured in seizing the principality, and you are not able to keep those friends who put you there, because of your not being able to satisfy them in the way they expected, and you cannot take strong measures against them, feeling bound to them. For
that breaks down a lot of issues of modern-day conflicts.
Forces, yet in entering a province, one has always need of the goodwill of the natives. For these reasons, Louis XII, King of France, quickly occupied Milan, and as quickly lost it, and had to turn him out the first time it only needed Ludovico's own forces, because those who had opened the gates to him, finding themselves deceived in their hopes of future benefit, would not endure the ill treatment of the new prince. It is very true that, after acquiring rebellious provinces a second time,
I know you say risk of violence, not actual violence,
because the prince,
because the risk of something is always there,
takes the opportunity of rebellion to punish the delinquents, to clear out the suspects, and to strengthen himself in the weakest places.
I like how you worded that.
Thus, to cause France to lose Milan, for the first time it was enough for Duke Ludovico to raise the insurrections on the borders, but to cause him to lose it a second time, it was necessary to bring the whole world against him, and that his army should be defeated and driven out of Italy, which followed from the causes above mentioned. Nevertheless, Milan was taken from France both the first and second time. The general reasons for the first have been discussed. It remains to name those for the second, and see what resources he had, and what anyone in his situation would have had for maintaining himself more securely in his acquisition than did the King of France. Now I say that those dominions which, when acquired, are added to an ancient state by him who acquires them, are either of the same country and language, or they are not. When they are, it is easier to hold them, especially when they have not been accustomed to self-government, and to hold them securely is enough to have destroyed the family of the prince who was ruling them, because the two peoples, preserving in other things the old conditions, and not being unlike in customs, will live quietly together, as one has seen in Brittany, Burgundy, Gascony, and Normandy, which have been bound to France for so long a time, and, although there may be some difference in language, nevertheless the customs are alike, and the people will easily be able to get on amongst themselves. He who has annexed them, if he wishes to hold them, has only to bear in mind two considerations. The one, that the family of their former lord is extinguished. The other, that neither their laws nor their taxes are altered, so that in a very short time they will become entirely one body with the old principality. But when states are acquired in a country differing in language, customs, or laws, there are difficulties, and good fortune and great energy are needed to hold them, and one of the greatest and most real helps would be that he who has acquired them should go and reside there. This would make his position more secure and durable, as it has made that of the Turk in Greece, who, notwithstanding all other measures taken by him for holding that state, if he had not settled there, would not have been able to keep it. Because if one is on the spot, disorders are seen as they spring up, and one can quickly remedy them. But if one is not at hand, and they are heard of only when they are great, one can no longer remedy them. Besides this, the country is not pillaged by your officials. The subjects are satisfied by prompt recourse to the prince. Thus, wishing to be good, they have more cause to love him, and wishing to be otherwise, to fear him. He who would attack that state from the outside must have the utmost caution. As long as the prince reside there, it can only be wrested from him with the greatest difficulty. The other and better course is to send colonies to one or two places, which may be as keys to that state, for it is necessary either to do this, or to else keep there a great number of cavalry and infantry.
Indeed.
A prince does not spend much on colonies, for with little or no expense he can send them out and keep them there.
Sun Tzu speaks
and
of
he
this.
offends a minority only of the citizens from whom he takes lands and houses to give them to the new inhabitants. And those whom he offends, remaining poor and scattered,
When they asked him to train
are never able to injure him,
undefended
whilst
army
the rest,
against
being uninjured,
a
are easily
superior
kept
one.
quiet, and at the same time are anxious not to err, for fear
His claim
should
was
it
I could
happen
make
to
your
them as it has to
women more
those who have
effective
been despoiled.
army.
In conclusion, I say that these colonies are
Than
not costly,
Your
they are
current
more
militia
faithful,
or whatever.
they injure less, and the
And he ended
injured,
up
as has been said, being poor and scattered, cannot
Doing
hurt.
so by
Upon
instilling
this,
leadership and
one has to remark that men ought to be either
respect.
well treated or crushed, because they avenge themselves of lighter injuries. Of more
also
serious
known
ones,
as
they cannot.
knowing how to command.
Therefore, the injury that is done to a man ought to be of such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge. But in maintaining armed men there in place of colonies, one spends much more, having to consume on the garrison all the income from the state, so that the acquisition turns into a loss, and many more are exasperated, because the whole state is injured. Through the shifting of the garrison up and down, all become acquainted with hardship, and all become hostile, and they are enemies who, whilst beaten on their own ground, are able yet to do hurt. For every reason, therefore, such guards are as useless as a colony is useful. Again, the prince who holds a country differing in the above respects ought to make himself the head and defender of his less powerful neighbours, and to weaken the more powerful amongst them, taking care that no foreigner as powerful as himself shall, by any accident, get a footing there. For it will always happen that such a one will be introduced by those who are discontented, either through excessive ambition or through fear, as one has seen already. The Romans were brought to Greece by the Aetolians, and in every other country where they obtained a footing, they were brought in by the inhabitants. And the usual course of affairs is that, as soon as a powerful foreigner enters a country, all the subject states are drawn to him, moved by the hatred which they feel against the ruling power. So in that respect, to those subject states he is not to take any trouble to gain them over to himself, for the whole of them quickly rally to the state which he has acquired there.
Sounds like Saakashvili.
He has only to take care that they do not get hold of too much power and too much authority, and then with his own forces and with their goodwill he can easily keep down the more powerful of them,
This is
as to remain
actually
entirely master
pretty
in the
relevant
country.
to this day still.
And he who does not properly manage this business will soon lose what he has acquired, and whilst he does it, he will have endless difficulties and troubles. The Romans, in the countries which they annexed, observed closely these measures. They sent colonies and maintained friendly relations with the minor powers, without increasing their strength. They kept down the greater, and did not allow any strong foreign powers to gain authority. Greece appears to me sufficient for an example. The Achaeans and the Aetolians were kept friendly by them, but the kingdom of Macedonia was humbled. Antiochus was driven out, yet the merits of the Achaeans and the Aetolians never secured for them permission to increase their power, nor did the persuasions of Philip ever induce the Romans to be his friends without first humbling him, nor did the influence of Antiochus make them agree that he should retain any lordship over the country, because the Romans did in these instances what all prudent princes ought to do, who have to regard not only present troubles, but also future ones, for which they must prepare with every energy, because, when foreseen, it is easy to remedy them, but if you wait until they approach, the medicine is no longer in time, because the malady has become incurable. For it happens in this, as the physicians say, it happens in a hectic fever, that in the beginning of the malady it is easy to cure, but difficult to detect, but in the course of time, not having either been detected or treated in the beginning, it becomes easy to detect, but difficult to cure. This it happens in affairs of state, for when the evils that arise that have been foreseen, which it is only given to a wise man to see, they can be quickly redressed. But when, though not having been foreseen, they have been permitted to grow in a way that everyone can see them, there is no longer a remedy. Therefore the Romans, foreseeing troubles, dealt with them at once, and, even to avoid a war, would not let them come to a head, for they knew that war is not to be avoided, but it is only to be put off to the advantage of others. Moreover, they wished to fight with Philip and Antiochus in Greece, so not to have to do so in Italy. They could have avoided both, but this they did not wish, nor did that ever please them which is ever in the mouths of the wise ones of our time. Let us enjoy the benefits of the time, but rather the benefits of their own valour and prudence, for time drives everything before it, and is able to bring with it the good as well as the evil, and the evil as well as the good. But let us turn to France, and inquire whether she has done any of the things mentioned. I will speak of Louis XII, and not of Charles VIII, as the one whose conduct is the better to be observed, he having held possession of Italy for the longest period, and you will see that he has done the opposite to those things which ought to be done to retain a state composed of diverse elements. King Louis was brought into Italy by the ambitions of the Venetians, who desired to obtain half the state of Lombardy by his intervention. I will not blame the course taken by the king, because wishing to get a foothold in Italy,
that's what I got.
Friends there, seeing rather
better
that
have some
every
weed
door
than no
shut to
weed,
him
right?
owing to the conduct of Charles, he was forced to accept those friendships which he could get, and he would have succeeded very quickly in his design if in other matters he had not made some mistakes. The king, however, having acquired Lombardy, regained at once the authority which Charles had lost.
I gotta call the guy.
Genoa yielded.
About
The
a
Florentines
dog.
became his friends.
About a thing.
The Marquis of Mantua, the Duke of Ferrara, the Bentivogli, my Lady of Forli, the Lords of Faenza,
Later on
of
today.
Pesaro, of Rimini, of Camerino, of Piombino, of Lucchese, the Pisans, the Sienese. Everybody made advances to him to become his friend. Then could the Venetians realize the rashness of the course taken by them,
That
which,
is
in
exactly
order
right.
that they might secure 2 towns in Lombardy, they had made the king the master of 2/3 of Italy.
Precisely.
Let anyone now consider with what little difficulty the
friend.
king could have maintained his position in Italy,
So let us
had he observed the rules
enjoy
above
what
laid
we do
down,
got.
and kept all his friends
For
secure
tomorrow,
and protected.
We might
For
not have
although
it,
they were numerous,
or be able
they
to
were both
enjoy
weak
it.
and timid, some afraid of the church,
Live in the
some
present.
of the Venetians, and thus they would
Not the
always
past.
have been forced to stand in with him,
Or the future.
and by their means he could easily have made himself secure against those who remained powerful. But he was no sooner in Milan than he did the contrary, by assisting Pope Alexander to occupy the Romagna. It never occurred to him that by this action he was weakening himself, depriving himself of friends, and of those who had thrown themselves into his lap, whilst he aggrandized the church by adding much temporal power to the spiritual,
And you
thus
know
giving it greater
this
authority.
man.
And having committed this prime error, he was obligated to follow it up, so much so that, to put an end to the ambition of Alexander, and to prevent his becoming the master of
They asked me,
Tuscany,
Dim, why
he
you
was
smoke
forced
weed all the
himself
time?
to come to
I
Italy.
don't know, that's my only
And
problem.
as if it were not enough to have aggrandized the church and deprived himself of friends, he, wishing to have
I
the kingdom
wish.
of Naples, divides it with the king of Spain, and where he is the tyrant arbiter in Italy, he takes an associate, so that the ambitious of that country and the malcontents of his own should have somewhere to shelter. And whereas he could have left the kingdom his own pensioner as king, he drove him out, to put one there who was able to drive him, Louis, out in turn. The wish to acquire is in truth very natural.
A little quick story about this grinder.
Men always do so when they can.
I never wanted a grinder.
For this, they will be praised and not blamed. Yet when they cannot do so,
there are worse things we could be doing, brother.
Do so by any means,
like
then there is
meth.
folly and blame.
Or
Therefore,
robbing the elderly.
If France could have attacked Naples with her own forces, she ought to have done so.
Yes, there are far worse things we could be doing.
Then she ought not to have divided.
Which we are not doing.
And if the partition which she had made with the Venetians and Lombardy was justified by the excuse that by it
little we never hurt nobody. That's right.
This other partition merited blame, for it had not the excuse of that necessity. Therefore Louis made these 5 errors. He destroyed the minor powers. He increased the strength of one of the greater powers in Italy. He brought in a foreign power. He did not settle in
Nothing like reminding you of people you used to work with, like breaking the weed up on their business card.
Had he not made a 6th by taking over the dominions from the Venetians? Because, had he not aggrandized the church, nor brought Spain into Italy, it would have been very reasonable and necessary to humble them. But having first taken these steps, he ought never have consented to their ruin, for they, being powerful, would always have kept off others from designs on Lombardy.
The power of weed compels you,
except to become the masters themselves there.
Let's put some smoke out into the atmosphere to keep the evil spirits away.
To the Venetians and to run counter to both,
malos, the evil spirits.
And if anyone should say, King Louis yielded the Romagna to Alexander and the kingdom of Spain to avoid war,
let's do this.
I answer for the reasons
Jewish God,
that a blunder
the Christian God,
perpetrated,
the Muslim God, the Voodoo God,
because it is not to be avoided, but is only deferred to your
God of water, God of smoke,
and if another should allege
gods,
the
whatever y'all believe
which
in,
the king had given the Pope,
commence the savagery
in the enterprise, in exchange for the dissolution of his marriage and for the cap to Rouen.
Dimension.
To that I reply what I shall write later on, concerning the faith of princes and how it ought to be kept.
I am about
Thus
to take
King
off.
Louis lost Lombardy by not having followed any of the conditions observed by those who have taken possession of countries
and come down crashing and
to retain them.
Take off again because it's a reusable rocket.
But much that is reasonable and quite natural. And on these matters I spoke at Nantes with Rouen. And when Valentino,
I gotta take the precautionary measures, which is closing my door and putting the little towel underneath.
Occupied the Romagna, and on Cardinal Rouen, observing to me that the Italians did not understand war, I replied to him that the French did not understand statecraft, meaning that otherwise they would not have allowed the Church to reach such greatness. And in fact, it had been seen that the greatness of the Church and of Spain and Italy had been caused by France, and her ruin may be attributed to them. From this, a general rule is drawn, which never or rarely fails, that he who is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined, because that predominancy has been brought about either by astuteness or else by force, and both are distrusted by him who has been raised to power. Chapter 4.
You gotta be considerate, I guess. Fuck it.
Conquered by Alexander,
everybody wants to smell
did not rebel
shit
against the successors of Alexander at his death.
Me personally, I don't give a fuck, Jack. But them, what's with the chitter chatter? You've been talking about for way too long. It's 3, 2, 1 time. Blast off.
Master of Asia in a few years, and died whilst it was scarcely settled, whence it might appear reasonable that the whole empire would have rebelled. Nevertheless, his successors maintained themselves, and had to meet no other difficulty than which arose amongst themselves, from their own ambitions. I answer that the principalities of which one has record are found to be governed in 2 ways, either by a prince with a body of servants who assist him to govern his ministers by his favour and permission, or by a prince of barons, who hold the pure blood, and not by the grace of the prince. Such barons have states in their own subjects, who recognize them as lords and hold them in natural affection.
There we go.
States that are governed by a prince and his servants hold their prince in more consideration. In the country there is no one who is recognized as superior to him, and yet if they yield obedience to another, they do it as to a minister and an official, and they do not bear him any particular. Examples of these two governments in our time are the Turk.
What the fuck is this going on right here?
The entire monarchy of the Turk,
lone patch of hair, chilling here like a fucking
and dividing
lone island.
Sanjaks, who sends their different administrators.
Deserted in the middle of the ocean or some shit. I gotta shave my shit.
The King of France is
time to go.
Of an ancient body of lords,
looking like Demetrius Johnson. Beard, no hair.
They have their own prerogatives. Nor can the king take these away.
What's with the self-deprecation, huh?
Therefore, he who considers both of these states.
Y'all have any better ideas?
Difficulties in seizing the state. But once it is conquered,
yeah, sure. Smoke another one.
The cause of the difficulties in seizing the kingdom of the
Turks. We do have a saying in my country.
By the princes of the
you know the saying? Do you know the saying? I know the saying. Saying goes, между первой и второй перерывчик небольшой.
For his ministers, all being slaves and bondsmen,
I have convinced myself.
Great difficulty, and one can expect little advantage from them once they have been corrupted, as they cannot carry the people with them, for the reasons assigned. Hence, he who attacks the Turks must bear in mind that he will find him united, and he will have to rely more on his own strength than on the revolt of others. But if the Turk has been conquered, and routed in the field in such a way that he cannot replace his armies, there is nothing to fear but the family of the prince.
How long do you think till my favorite troll shows up?
There remains no one to fear. The others
that boy has been on me for weeks, man.
And as the conqueror did not rely on them for his victory, so he
must like
not to fear them after it. The contrary happens in kingdoms governed like that of France, because one can easily enter there by gaining over some baron of the kingdom, for one always finds malcontents and such as desire change. Such men, for the reasons given, can open up the way into the state and render the victory easy. But if you wish to hold it afterwards, you meet with infinite difficulties, both from those who have assisted and from those who... Nor is it for you to have
I shouldn't have been because I saw it coming, but
because the laws that remain,
Rua got knocked out so fucking hard.
Fresh movements against
I was almost like Tyron Woodley getting caught against the cage or the fence with his back and just taking like 2-3 extra shots before finally like slumping down. That's what happened with Shogun.
To the kingdom of the Turk.
Brazil flag was at a half mast the next day and shit.
First overthrow him in the field,
was an L
and then
for the whole nation.
After which,
or if you're a fan of MMA since the old days,
secure to Alexander for the above reasons, and if his successors had been united, they would have enjoyed it securely and at their ease.
I was just being
naive. There were no tumults raised in the kingdom, except those they provoked themselves. But it is impossible to hold with such tranquility states constituted like that of France. Hence arose those frequent rebellions against the Romans in Spain.
Hold on, I'm gonna go and
Greece,
put some laundry in the cycle. I'll be back with the next bomb.
In which, as long as the memory of them endured, the Romans always held an insecure possession. But with the power and long continuance of the empire, the memory of them passed away, and the Romans then became the secure possessors. And when fighting afterwards amongst themselves, each one was able to attach to himself his own parts of the country, according to the authority he had assumed there, and the family of the former lord being exterminated, none other than the Romans were acknowledged. When these things are remembered, no one will marvel at the ease with which Alexander held the empire of Asia, or at the difficulties which others had to keep in acquisition, such as Pyrrhus and many more. This is not occasioned by the little or abundance of ability in the conqueror, but by the want of uniformity in the subject state. Chapter 5. Concerning the way to govern cities or principalities which lived under their own laws before they were annexed. Whenever those states which have been acquired, as stated, have been accustomed to live under their own laws and in freedom, there are 3 courses for those who wish to hold them. The first is to ruin them. The next is to reside there in person. The third is to permit them to live under their own laws, drawing a tribute and establishing it within an oligarchy which will keep it friendly to you. Because such a government, being created by the prince, knows it cannot stand without his friendship and interest, and it does the utmost to support him. And therefore he who would keep a city accustomed to freedom will hold it more easily by the means of its own citizens than any other way. There are, for example, the Spartans and the Romans. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes, establishing there an oligarchy. Nevertheless, they lost them. The Romans, in order to hold Capua, Carthage, and Numantia, dismantled them and did not lose them. They wished to hold Greece as the Spartans held it, making it free and permitting its laws, and did not succeed. So to hold it, they were compelled to dismantle many cities in the country. For in truth there is no safe way to retain them, otherwise by ruining them. And he who becomes master of a city, accustomed to freedom, and does not destroy it, may expect to be destroyed by it. For in rebellion it has always the watchword of liberty, and its ancient privileges as a rallying point, which neither time nor benefits will ever cause it to forget. And whatever you may do or provide against, they never forget that name or their privileges, unless they are disunited or dispersed. But at every chance they immediately rally to them, as Pisa after the 100 years as she had been held in bondage by the Florentines. But when cities or countries are accustomed to live under a prince, and his family is exterminated, they, being on the one hand accustomed to obey, and on the other not having the old prince, cannot agree in making one from amongst themselves, and they do not know how to govern themselves. For this reason they are very slow to take up arms, and a prince can gain them to himself and secure them much more easily. But in republics there is more vitality, greater hatred, and more desire for vengeance, which will never permit them to allow the memory of their former liberty to rest, so that the safest way is to destroy them or to reside there. Chapter 6. Concerning new principalities which are acquired by one's own arms and ability. Let no one be surprised if, in speaking of entirely new principalities, as I shall do, I adduce the highest examples of both prince and of state, because men, walking almost always in paths beaten by others, and following by imitation of their deeds, are yet unable to keep entirely to the ways of others, or attain to the power of those they imitate. A wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men, and to imitate those who have been supreme, so that if his ability does not equal theirs, at least it will savour of it. Let him act like the clever archers, who, designing to hit the mark which yet appears too far distant, and knowing the limits to which the strength of their bow attains, take aim much higher than the mark, not to reach by their strength or arrow so great a height, but to be able with the aid of so high an aim to hit the mark they wish to reach. I say, therefore, that in entirely new principalities, where there is a new prince, more or less difficulty is found in keeping them, accordingly as there is more or less ability in him who acquired the state. Now, as the fact of becoming a prince from a private station presupposes either ability or fortune, it is clear that one or other of these things will mitigate in some degree many difficulties. Nevertheless, he who has relied least on fortune is established the strongest. Further, it facilitates matters when the prince, having no other state, is compelled to reside there in person. But to come to those who, by their own ability and not through fortune, have risen to be princes, I say that Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, and such like are the most excellent examples. And although one may not discuss Moses, he having been a mere executor of the will of God, yet he ought to be admired, if only for that favour which made him worthy to speak with God. But in considering Cyrus and the others, who have acquired or founded kingdoms, all will be found admirable, and if their particular deeds and conduct shall be considered, they will not be found inferior to those of Moses, although he had so great a preceptor. And in examining their actions and lives, one cannot see that they owed anything to fortune beyond opportunity, which brought them the material to mould into the form which seemed best to them. Without that opportunity their powers of mind would have been extinguished, and without those powers the opportunity would have come in vain. It was necessary, therefore, to Moses that he should find the people of Israel in Egypt enslaved and oppressed by the Egyptians, in order that they should be disposed to follow him, so as to be delivered out of bondage. It was necessary that Romulus should not remain in Alba, and that he should be abandoned at his birth, in order that he should become the king of Rome and founder of the fatherland. It was necessary that Cyrus should find the Persians discontented with the government of the Medes, and the Medes soft and effeminate through their long peace. Theseus could not have shown his ability had he not found the Athenians dispersed. These opportunities, therefore, made those men fortunate, and their high ability enabled them to recognize the opportunity whereby their country was ennobled and made famous. Those who by valorous ways become princes, like these men, acquire a principality with difficulty, but they keep it with ease. These difficulties they have in acquiring it rise in part from the new rules and methods which they are forced to introduce to establish their government and its security. And it ought to be remembered that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success, than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things, because the innovator has for enemies all those who have done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders in those who may do well under the new.
Yo.
This coolness arises partly from the fear of
what
the
up, MJ?
who have the laws on their side, and partly from the incredulity
I'm feeling like
men
Rashad
who
after
do not readily
Machida.
believe in new things
Oh, he's got the fucking foot days.
Thus it happens that whenever those who are hostile have the opportunity to attack, they do it like partisans, whilst the others defend lukewarmly, in such wise that the prince is endangered along with them.
Well, after these two, we're going to feel like this being after Henderson. Bang!
To inquire whether these innovators can rely on themselves or have to depend on others. That is to say, whether to consummate their enterprise, have they to use prayers or can they use force? In the first instance, they always succeed badly and never compass anything. But when they can rely on themselves and use force, then they are rarely in danger.
Hold on now.
Hence it is that all armed prophets have conquered, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed. Besides the reasons mentioned, the nature of the people is variable, and whilst it is easy to persuade them, it is difficult to fix them in that persuasion, and thus it is necessary to take such measures that, when they believe no longer, it may be possible to make them believe by force. If Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, and Romulus had been unarmed, they could not have enforced their constitutions for so long, as happened in our time to Fra Girolamo Savonarola, who was ruined with his new order of things immediately the multitude believed in him no longer, and he had no means of keeping steadfast those who believed or of making
Shogun, no, I was disappointed,
therefore,
but it was kind of expected.
In consummating their enterprise, for all their dangers are yet in the
I know, right?
Yet with ability they will overcome them. But when these are overcome, and those who envy them, their success are exterminated,
I was just telling
they will begin to be respected,
history, man. Like, he had him pinned up against the cage too, and Shogun was just like eating extra shots.
To these great examples, I wish to add a lesser one. It still bears some resemblance.
That kid's looking like a beast.
And I wish it to
he called Gustafsson out, and Gustafsson came out and said he's hurt.
It is Cairo the Syracusan. This man rose from a private station to be Prince of Syracuse, nor did he either owe anything to fortune but to opportunity, for the Syracusans, being oppressed,
chose nobody but DC, and if it's somebody except DC, he's hurt all the time.
He was of so great ability, even as a private citizen.
I like Alex, but I can't get with that, man. He's fighting about as often as Connor these days.
This man abolished the old soldiery, organized the new, gave up old alliances and made new ones.
Who's Spartan?
Thus he had his own soldiers and allies. On such foundations, he was able to build any edifice. Thus, while he had endured much trouble in acquiring, he had but little in keeping.
I'm away.
Chapter 7.
I understand you might need
concerning new principalities which are acquired by either the arms of others or by good fortune. Those who solely by good fortune become princes, from being private citizens, have little trouble in rising, but much trouble in keeping atop. They have not any difficulties on the way up, because they fly, but they have many when they reach the summit. Such are those whom some state is either given for money or by the favour of him who bestows it, as happened to many in Greece, in the cities of Ionia and of the Hellespont, where the princes were made by Darius, in order that they might hold the cities both for his security and his glory, as also were those emperors who, by the corruption of the soldiers, from being citizens came to empire. Such stand simply elevated upon the goodwill and fortune of him who has elevated them, two most inconstant and unstable things. Neither have they the knowledge requisite for the position, because unless they are men of great worth and ability, it is not reasonable to expect that they should know how to command. having always lived in private condition.
DC don't want that. DC only wants to do a Brock fight and go bye-bye.
They can keep friendly and faithful.
DC is done.
Unexpectedly then, like all other things in nature, which are
and
born
I mean,
and
I can't blame the guy.
Cannot
He's done it all at this point.
Correspondences fixed in such a way that
Two-weight class division champ. He don't want to take tough fights.
As I said,
he came out and
those who
said
unexpectedly become princes
outright
so much ability
he doesn't want to do
they
it.
know they have to be prepared at once to hold that which fortune has thrown into their laps. And that those
so if he goes and takes the Bisping route, I can't hold that against him. He's had tough fights his whole career.
These two methods of rising to be a prince by
let him beat up on Brock and let him ride off into the sunset.
Within our own recollection. And these are Francesco
He's earned it.
And Cesare Borgia. Francesco,
I do want to see that where Jones goes from here after he comes back. Probably sometime next year, maybe.
If
he's lucky.
He kept with little
That's what I'm thinking.
On the other hand, Cesare Borgia, called by the people the Duke Valentino, acquired
that Shogun fight, I was
his father, and on its decline,
deeply inside, like as an old school Pride fan.
All that ought to be done by a wise and able man, to fix firmly his roots in the States.
Living the fantasy like, hopefully Shogun wins, and then he's gonna have a claim to go fight DC, and DC wants to fight him. So then they both have a big fight,
trouble to the architect and danger to the builder,
and be done.
But
yeah, man, that young kid Smith is no joke.
And I do not consider it
Can't believe people
because I do not know what better precepts to give him the prince than the example of his actions.
He's got like 30 some fights, 16 something finishes, 17 now.
And extreme malignity of fortune. Alexander VI, in wishing to aggrandize the Duke, his son, had many immediate and prospective difficulties. First, he did not see his way to make him master of any state that was not a state of the church.
At the same time, that saved the card.
To rob the church, he knew that the Duke of Milan and the Venetians
that saved the card.
Because
El Killer in the building. What's going on, man? Good to see you.
Besides this, he saw the
Kobe versus Ferguson would be nice.
By which he might have been assisted. In hands that
but two different weight classes, right? Unless Ferg wants to go up.
And the Colonnesi and their following.
Which I think he's still making the weight comfortably. Unlike Khabib's and a handful of other people that are literally killing themselves to cut down to 155.
Inclined to bring back the French into Italy.
Gus Duck Smith, pretty much.
More easy by dissolving
I'm gonna call it
Louis.
For how I see it, and a lot of other people see it. He went out and said he was hurt after the man challenged him.
And the Pope had soldiers from
like last minute replacement. So, I don't know, man. He needs to fight. That's all I'm gonna say about Gus. He needs to fight.
While wishing to hold that into
Alexander Gustafsson.
Hindered by two things.
You need to fight, man.
His forces did not appear to be loyal to him.
Gotta add the little add on to your tattoos.
That is to say, he feared that the forces of the Orsini,
Gus has like
he was using,
tattoo,
would not
like a notch.
But
every fight he has on his sleeve.
From winning more, but might themselves seize what he had won, and that the king might also do the same. Of the Orsini, he had a warning when, after taking Faenza and attacking Bologna,
well,
he saw them go very unwillingly.
El Killer's in the building.
And as to the king, he learned his mind.
History's in the building, MJ.
Himself, after taking the duchy of Urbino,
yo, what's up?
Attacked Tuscany, and the king made him desist from that undertaking. Hence, the Duke decided to depend no more on
What is the life about? Just enter now.
Thing, he weakened the Orsini.
Your thoughts, Liddell versus Ortiz.
By gaining
Lord of mercy.
All their adherents who were gentlemen.
Sure, man. Let them get their money. They're both at very,
according to their rank.
Similar place, their career. I would say
that in a few months, all attachment to the faction was destroyed.
And maybe Tito having been a little bit more active there towards the end. But
scattered the adherents of the Colonna.
Wax rip, goddamn.
This came to him soon.
Be careful there. Oh shit.
Perceiving at length that the aggrandizement
if you go that deep,
the church was the ruin to them.
You might not make it out of the house today.
From this sprung the
Clint Weedwood. What is good?
With endless dangers to the Jew, all of which came with the help of the French. Having restored
to go back on Ortiz Liddell, it's good to see that they can get money. A, B, they can get paid outside of the UFC, Bellator, World Series of Fighting, whatever, PFL, trifecta, that seems to predominantly dominate, at least on the western side of things, majority of MMA. But yeah, Golden Boy is going to promote it. Me personally, you know, I don't care too much for that. I'm still going to watch. But I'm more for the pure sport, which, I mean, that's going to be a whole like fucking other conversation, because it's never 100% pure, nothing is.
When the Duke occupied the Romagna,
between
under the rule of weak
the fucked up commissions and the rules and judging, and you know, you have your array of problems. Drug enforcement in the sport, yeah, it's all a fucking mess, as well as putting promoters over actual athletes. And by anyways, Dim, what's with the fucking chitter chatter? You're gonna talk everybody's ears off, or you're gonna... I need to borrow your car. Oh, it's like that dude that showed up on my stream. Hey, Dim, I need to borrow your chain. Like, what kind of shit is that? Next thing you want to... Wasted out this wax. Well, put some in the cannon, because we're ready to go.
But with the natural enemies of the minister. Under this pretext, on the piazza at Cesena, with the block and the bloody knife at his side, caused the people to be at once satisfied and dismayed. But let us return whence we started. I say that the Duke, finding himself now sufficiently powerful,
now I need some water,
properly secured from immediate danger, by having armed himself in his own right, and having in a great measure crushed those forces in his vicinity that could injure him, if he wished to proceed with his conquest, had next to consider France. For he knew that he was too late aware of his mistake to support him. And from this time he began to seek new alliances.
Here you go.
Temporize with France
Bum 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 bum.
Who were besieging against him. It was his intention to secure himself against them, and this he would quickly have accomplished had Alexander lived. Such was his line of action as to present affairs, but as to the future he had to fear, in the first place, that a new successor to the church might not be friendly to him, might seek to take from him that which Alexander had given him. So he decided to act in 4 ways.
You know,
firstly, by exterminating the families of those lords
solid.
He had despoiled,
we could have done better,
to take away that,
but I have to maintain for the duration of the day.
Himself all the gentlemen of Rome, so as to be able to curb the Pope with their aid, as has been observed. Thirdly, by converting the college more to himself. Fourthly, by acquiring so much power before the Pope should die, that he could, by his own measures, resist the first shock. Of these 4 things at the death of Alexander, he had accomplished 3. For he had killed as many of the disciples
3 hours long.
He could lay his hands on, and few had escaped.
We're gonna have to break this up into bits.
The Roman gentlemen,
this is The Prince by Machiavelli.
And as to any fresh acquisition, he intended to become...
It's not too bad, man.
For he already possessed Perugia
not too bad.
and Piombino, and Pisa was under his protection. And,
but like I told everybody, it's temporary. Probably till...
Naples by the Spaniards. And in this way, both were compelled to buy his goodwill.
Mid next year?
Down upon Pisa. After this,
shooting for, but it just, what it is the rent in the area is getting to be more expensive than owing your place, and we just need to put up a little bit of money to have something for a down payment, essentially. After that, can have a 2-3 bedroom for the price of what it costs to have one.
He left the Duke with the state of Romagna alone.
If you were renting,
with the rest in the air,
so you do the math.
Most powerful hostile armies, and sick unto death. Yet there were in the Duke such boldness and ability, and he knew so well how men are to be won or lost, and so firm the foundations which in so short a time he had laid.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything
on his back, or if he had
ridiculous
been
either.
He would have overcome all difficulties. As it is seen that his foundations were good, for the Romagna waited for him for more than a month. In Rome,
just as long as he got a little bit of land, you know.
Secure, whilst in the
That's what we'd be
Baglioni,
looking at.
the Vitelli, and the Orsini might come to Rome.
Or just a
They could
personal
not
preference.
affect anything against him. If he could not have
Move
made
a little
Pope
bit
him
further
whom he
out from the
wished,
city.
at least the one whom he did not wish would not have been elected.
A pool
But
is
if he
a
had been in
must.
sound health at the death of Alexander, everything would have been different to him.
Maybe a lake.
On the day that Julius II was elected, he told me that he had thought
Yeah, there's a bunch of lakes around here, which is good and bad.
Provided a remedy for all.
Bad because it's expensive, good because it's hella pretty.
He himself would be on the point to die. When all the actions of the Duke are recalled, I do not know how to blame him, but rather it appears to be, as I have said, that I ought to offer him for imitation.
Mike Perry Cowboy, yes, that was announced, I believe, like 2-3 days ago, something like that. Great fight, man. They're gonna scrap it out.
Could not have regulated
I think Cowboy can take advantage of some technical flaws in Mike Perry's game, but at the same time, Perry's got himself a better camp, and he is actually becoming a little bit smarter as a fighter. So it's going to be very interesting to see how and if Cowboy can overcome the power and exploit Perry technically. And essentially it's going to be up to Perry to kind of keep it together and pace himself, not get open to counter shots, and not, you know, gas himself out from just being wild and reckless.
In whom he made a bad choice, because
I don't like swimming with the fishes.
To elect a pope to his own mind, he could have hindered any other from being elected pope, and he ought never to have consented to the election of his father.
Not good things, swimming with the fishes, or having concrete shoes.
For men injure either from fear or hatred. Those whom he had injured, amongst others, were San Pietro ad Vincula, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio. The rest, in becoming pope, had to fear him.
Don't do lakes
The one and the
or
Spaniards accepted,
beaches.
the latter from their
Or
relationship
beaches.
obligations, the former from his influence, the King of France having relations with him.
There's
Therefore,
a handful of lakes
appointed a Spaniard pope,
that are like
and failing him,
made for
he
people
ought
to
have
swim in
consented to
around the
law,
area where I live
and
in.
not to San Pietro ad
And
Vincula.
I have like a built-in
He who
beach
believes
and
that
everything.
new benefits will cause
I actually
to get old injuries is
Really
deceived.
like there because you swim out and they have like a built-in pier out in the middle of the lake with like 2 big-ass diving boards.
Concerning those who have obtained
And
the principality by wickedness,
Yeah, man, that shit is
no
dope.
prince may rise from
As far
the
as
state in
beaches,
two ways,
and
neither
they
of
got
which
a couple of good ones in
can be
North Carolina.
attributed to fortune or genius.
A lot of people
Yet it is
think
manifest
Myrtle
to me
Beach is
that
the
I
only
must
thing we
have
got
decided,
over here.
although one could be more
Man,
copiously
they're
treated
wrong.
when I discuss republics. These methods are when,
We got
by some wicked or
some
nefarious
hidden
ways, one ascends to the principality,
Gems.
or when, by the favour of his fellow citizens, a private person becomes the prince of his country. And speaking of the first method,
Water's
it can be illustrated
clean,
by two examples, one
sand
ancient,
is
the other
white,
modern. And without
no
entering further into the subject,
little to no
I consider these
trash,
two
no
examples will suffice for
big-ass
those who may be
hotels or overcrowdedness with people.
became
None of
king of
that.
Syracuse, not only from a private, but from a low and abject position. This man
Word
was something
is, they
possible.
have some beaches
All
over
the
here
changes and
still
misfortunes
that
always
have
led an
wild
intense
horses
life.
running around.
Nevertheless, he accompanied his infamies with so much ability of mind and body that, having devoted himself to the military profession, he rose through its ranks to be praetor of Syracuse. Being established in that position, and having deliberately resolved himself to make himself prince and to seize by violence, without obligation to others, that which had been conceded to him by assent, he came to an understanding for this purpose with Amilcar the Carthaginian, who with his army was fighting in Sicily. One morning he assembled the people and the Senate of Syracuse.
It's not too bad at all. At first, when I was younger, I didn't like North Carolina, but
the soldiers killed
now
all the senators and the
I've
richest of the
settled
people.
and got to see
He's
for what
dead.
it
He
is, and
seized
I mean, you
held
got
the
it all
customs
over
of that
here.
city without any civil promotion.
Forests, tropics, mountains, beaches,
yet not only was
plains, foothills.
City,
it's a really diverse area.
Men for its defense, with the others he attacked Africa.
As far as different geography,
the Carthaginians,
different people,
extreme necessity, were compelled to come to terms with the Catholics.
Politically, we're still a little ass backwards, but we're getting around. And look, they're talking about legalizing the ganja. Must be seeing the money that everybody else is raking in off of it.
Attained preeminence, as is shown above.
But hey,
not by the favor of any one, but step
everybody's
by step
got problems.
In the military profession, which steps
so far as what I observed,
and perils,
it's
and
pick your poison.
Dangers. Yet it cannot
when it comes to
and to deceive friends, to be without
place to live.
Mercy, without religion. Such methods may gain empire, but not glory. Still, if the courage of Agathocles in entering into and extricating himself from dangers be considered, together with his greatness of mind in enduring and overcoming hardships, it cannot be seen why he should be esteemed less than the most notable captain. Nevertheless, his barbarous cruelty and inhumanity, with infinite wickedness, do not permit him to be celebrated among the most excellent.
This is a good audiobook. I'm going to need to bookmark it and come back to it.
In our times, during the rule of Alexander VI, Oliverotto de Fermo, having been left an orphan many years before, was brought up by his maternal uncle, Giovanni Fogliani, and in the early days of his youth, sent to fight under Paolo Vitelli, that, being trained under his discipline, he might attain some high position in the military profession. After Pagolo died, he fought under his brother Vitellozzo, and in a very short time, being endowed with wit and a vigorous body and mind, he became the first man in his profession. But it appearing a paltry thing to serve under others, he resolved, with the aid of some citizens of Fermo, to whom the slavery of their country was dearer than its liberty, and with the help of Vitelci, to seize Fermo. So he wrote to Giovanni Fogliani that, having been away from home for many years, he wished to visit him and his city, and in some measure to look upon his patrimony. And although he had not laboured to acquire anything except honour, yet, in order that the citizens should see that he had not spent his time in vain, he desired to come honourably. So
South Carolina?
By 100 horsemen, his friends and retainers, and he entreated Giovanni to arrange that he should be received honourably by the Fermians, all of which would be not only to his honour, but also to that of Giovanni himself, who had brought him up. Giovanni, therefore, did not fail in any attention
for southern North Carolina.
He caused him to be honourably received by the Fermians, and he lodged him in his own house,
yes, sir.
where, having passed some days, and having arranged that was necessary for his wicked designs, Oliverotto gave a solemn banquet.
This is The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli.
When the viands and all the other entertainments that are usual in such banquets were finished, Oliverotto artfully began certain grave discourses, speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander and his son Caesar, and of their enterprises. To which discourse Giovanni and the others answered. He rose at once, saying that such matters ought to be discussed in a more private place, and he betook himself to a chamber, whither Giovanni and the rest of the citizens went in after him. No sooner were they seated than soldiers issued from secret places and slaughtered Giovanni and the rest. After these murders, Oliverotto, mounted on horseback, rode up and down the town and besieged the chief magistrate in the palace, so that in fear the people were forced to obey him and to form a government, of which he made himself the prince. He killed all the malcontents who were able to injure him, and strengthened himself with new civil and military ordinances, in such a way that, in the year during which
the Great Lakes is the place to go.
Not only was he secure in the city of Fermo, but he had become formidable to all of his
north, Michigan, Canada.
Was as difficult as that of Agathocles, if he had not allowed himself to be overreached by Caesar Borgia, who took him with the Orsini and the Vitelli at Signigalia, as was stated above. Thus, 1 year after he had committed this parricide, he was strangled, together with Vitellozzo, whom he had made his leader in valour and wickedness. Some may wonder how it can happen that Agathocles and his like, after infinite treacheries and cruelties, should live for long secure in his country.
Alright guys, we're coming up on an hour. I wanted to keep this thing short, short.
Seeing that
So,
others, by
I'm
means
gonna
of
go ahead,
cruelty,
wrap it up,
have
go
never
get
been
me
able,
something to
even in
eat,
peaceful
and go
times,
ahead
to
and
hold
take care of
the
some
state,
errands I got
still
lined up
less
for
in
me
the
later
doubtful
on.
times of
So
war.
I appreciate y'all dropping
I
by.
believe that this follows from
We've been listening
severities
to
being
The
badly
Prince
or properly
by
used.
Niccolo
Those may
Machiavelli.
be called
I'm
properly
gonna go
used
ahead
if,
and
of evil, it is
drop you
possible to
guys
speak
the
well,
link
that are applied at one blow and are
real
necessary to one's
quick
security,
if you want to keep
and that are not persisted in
listening
afterwards,
to it
unless they
or
can be
check
turned
it
to the
out.
advantage of the subject. The badly employed are those which, notwithstanding,
Veronica
they may be
Lake.
few in the commencement, multiply with time rather than decrease. Those who practice the first system are able, by the aid of God or man,
And I
to mitigate
cannot.
in
There we
some
go.
degree their
Boom.
rule as Agathocles
There
did.
is the link
It is impossible for
to
those
the
who follow
audiobook
the
that I
other
was
to
listening
maintain
to.
themselves.
Again,
Hence
I
it is to
appreciate
be
y'all
remarked
dropping
that,
by.
in Caesar's
I'll be
state,
back
the
on
usurper
later
ought to
today or
examine
tomorrow
closely
morning.
into all those
Peace and
injuries
one love,
which it
y'all.
is necessary for him to inflict, and to do them all at one stroke, so as not to have to repeat them daily, and thus by not unsettling men he will be able to reassure them, and win them to himself by benefits. He who does otherwise, either from timidity or from evil advice, is always compelled to keep the knife in his hand,